Hi, everyone. Good afternoon from Chicago, Illinois. This is Lucy Gray checking in with Actionable Innovations Conversations. I'm glad to see that some people are here in the chat. I see Mano and Lynn. Welcome, and we're happy to have you here. Today, we're going to be having a presentation with Kyle Wagner and a conversation with him. But in the meantime, I'm going to explain to you a little bit about what we do and how you can get involved with Actionable Innovations. And if you'd like to introduce yourself in the chat, please feel free to do so that we know that you're here. Some people are watching on YouTube, some are watching on Facebook, but we should be able to see your comments and that sort of thing today as we're moving along. Actionable Innovations Conversations is a webinar series from Actionable Innovations Global. We are a professional learning community that's inclusive. We are trying to reconnect people after the pandemic and highlight the work of really interesting people in education. So we support and inspire education leaders. We host conversations and connect people. We write about global education innovations in Medium, and we do some consulting work as well. You may have remembered us as the Global Education Conference that ran for several years with Steve Hargadon. We've rebranded in the last year and have had this incredible series with incredible educators, and it's been really exciting to see how things have grown. So I'm going to move ahead and tell you about some things that are coming up that are really exciting. First of all, thanks to anyone who came to our NEA Ed Camp a couple weeks ago. It was really fun. We're going to, hopefully the NEA is going to do, so the NEA Foundation, that is going to host some more of these in the future. So stay tuned for that. We're going to be having a face-to-face meetup at the ISTE conference. So if you're going to be in Philadelphia this June, on Sunday morning, we're having a meetup from 10 to 12 at the ISTE conference. So that's a free event if you are a registered ISTE attendee. When you sign up for ISTE, there are a bunch of different things that you can sign up for, workshops and that sort of thing. And this is one of them. So look for it if you are going to ISTE and registering. So that's our next thing that's coming up, and it's face-to-face. Actually, it's not our next thing. We're doing an AI event. Everybody's doing an AI event, and we're doing one in mid-June, and that's about to be announced. And then we also are doing a consultants conference at the end of July. So those events are coming. Stay tuned. We're really excited about them. If you want to connect with us, the best way is to go to Linktree /Actionable Inno, and you'll find all of our links to our online community and to our YouTube channel and that sort of thing. You'll find the recording for this in YouTube immediately after. So you may want to bookmark this link so that you can go back and watch it again or pass it on to a friend and that sort of thing. So that's a lot about us. Today, I hope that you will introduce yourself in the chat. If you want to use your Twitter handle or paste your LinkedIn profile in there to connect, we'd love for you to do that. Part of the point of this webinar series is to connect people, to connect like-minded people who want to learn from each other. And so we want you to grow your professional learning community by sharing comments, resources, your LinkedIn profile, whatever, as we proceed today. If you feel like it, invite other people in using our Twitter hashtag, which is Actionable Inno, and we'll go from there. It's great to see so many people in the chat right now, and thanks for coming, everyone. Thank you, especially to Kyle, for coming. And if you're not aware, Kyle is in Hong Kong, and it's 5 a.m., Kyle?
Yeah, 5:05 a.m.
Oh, and now my phone is ringing. Sorry, hang on. I don't have my phone muted. It's not a good thing. It's a friend of mine who called me, not now. Sorry about that, everyone. Normally I have it muted completely. So Kyle, tell us a little bit while we're getting warmed up here. Tell us a little bit about who you are, where you are, and what you do.
Sure. So yeah, I'm going to get a bit into that, with this whole concept of 12 shifts for learner-centered environments and how I, kind of came across that. But I hail initially from San Diego, California, and maybe you know San Diego, California, not just for the beautiful weather, but for high tech high. and the work that High Tech High has done to advance, I would say, just really democratic, equitable types of opportunities, regardless of, gender, regardless of, race, culture, um, everything. And, the great equalizer was project-based experiences. And I had the fortunate privilege of, being a part of that. And, now my whole impetus is to feel like a seed that is just spreading across different places in the globe. It's found me over here in Hong Kong. Had a love affair with Asia that started maybe 10, 12 years ago, watching kids produce full-on productions in English through drama, music, games. I was a music guy, and that's just been ever since. So 10 out of the last 11 years I've been over here in Asia. So some
How have you?
interesting stories in that.
How did you get? Did you were you teaching in a international school when you first came to Asia?
Yeah, I wasn't at international school. Actually, it wasn't even on my radar. I
Okay.
was like maybe people who watched forgive me for this movie reference, but The Hangover. And that's not necessarily what made me want to go to Thailand, because I'd been in many places
Yeah.
before. Um, but I did really want to get to Thailand, and Shenzhen, China, wasn't too far off. And I was a struggling teacher financially, I think many people can attest to. And this is an opportunity to come to this school and teach this summer program. And it was like a camp, kind of place, which I think is a great camps are like just the greatest canvas for project-based experiences. And we had kids put on full-on productions every week around a different theme, and all the teachers would come together. And the kids always, with music, they always wanted to hear the Western music. They were fascinated with Justin Bieber or Katy Perry. Um, so that was kind of fun. That's what got me over here initially. And then I've been taught at some international schools, started a new program, and now do consulting work.
That's great. Okay, well, we're so excited to have you here and learn from you today. And the next thing on our agenda is Don's Proust questionnaire. Don is one of my colleagues who sometimes is here, and he wrote. Let me get the link here. He wrote this post that is similar to the questionnaire that you see in the back of Vanity Fair magazine. And he made it about education. And so we start out every one of these sessions asking our guests a couple of these questions. And some people get really freaked out by this and are like, oh my gosh, these are really gotcha questions. Some other people have looked at them and really prepared. It doesn't matter.
Uh-oh.
It's meant to be kind of a fun thing. And if you are in the audience and you want to jump into one of these questions, you feel free to, because it's kind of fun to see how people respond and see if you have any common interests and are fans of common things. So the first one I'm going to start out with is what talent would you most like to have if you could do anything? And it sounds like you're musical already. So is there another talent?
Uh, yeah, I've thought about that. And it probably would be something music related. I mean, I would love to have more of the talent, to be honest, that my brothers have. Of just being super hands-on. He built like constructed his own house by
Wow.
watching a lot of YouTube videos, which definitely don't have that talent, and learn computer programming. But I think I would probably advance my musical interest and musical talent, and have the ability to be able to play any instrument
Yeah.
without ever having to practice, because I just I have so much respect for musicians that do that, and I love performing. So that's probably what it'd be.
My father was a music teacher, and he was a tough but good music teacher, and I never saw him play ever, and other than picking up a kid's saxophone and playing a few notes or whatever. And he came out at my wedding and played "Fly Me to the Moon," which was our first song with the band. And I had
Oh,
never seen him play before, so that was really exciting. But he was one of those people who picked up instruments really easily. He played three of them, early on in his career, and he loved it. I mean, he's been gone for a couple of years now, but I've been going through his papers and things like that, and he was so into it and so there's just something about it that it's a gift. I think people either have or don't have. I think some people can play functionally, but people who really live and breathe it, it's a whole nother world in a lot of ways, I think.
Yeah, you could develop it for sure. I totally believe in that. That's interesting that your dad had never like played for you
Yeah,
for all
yeah.
your childhood, right? And
No,
just
no. My mother thought she was
bust
marrying
out an amazing
somebody.
song.
My mother thought she was marrying somebody who's going to have like little, jazz combos over on Saturday nights and that sort of thing. And that did not happen. But, I
Okay.
grew up around music. There was always music playing. His high school band, jazz band in particular, was phenomenal. We went to lots of, we live near Ravinia, which is an outdoor music venue here in Chicago. And we went to Ravinia all the time. So I didn't grow up music with a music deficit necessarily, but I certainly don't have that gene. I don't have whatever he had in terms of talent. I guess if I could pick a talent, it would be languages. I think that's one thing that's been a theme
Mm,
in um, in these conversations. I took French when I was younger. I wish I still spoke French. I think it's such a gift to be able to speak multiple languages. So and it's not really the norm here in the U.S. Whereas I don't know if in Asia, are there a lot of people speaking multiple languages? In Europe, there is, but
oh, for sure.
yeah,
For sure. And I think that's another one that you just have to be exposed to at a very young age. So I don't think some people might have a knack for it, but I think it all has to do with exposure. So if you get exposed to languages at an early age, and of course I'm speaking as an American, speaking from my observations, because
yeah,
I'm not a multilingual, but also with music is the
yeah,
same thing. And so it just becomes part of your vernacular.
yeah. I agree. I agree. Okay, I got to pick another question. Uh, which educator do you most admire in real life or in fiction?
Oh gosh, I've got a real life one. I don't know, in fiction, right? Maybe we'll start with the fiction one.
Okay.
I mean, my mind immediately goes to the Dead Poets Society, and I think Robin Williams, and for all the flair and everything, and maybe teachers, I do realize that you don't necessarily have to be the sage on stage like he was, but his ability to inspire and get kids to lean in really makes me kind of relate to that. And his subject of poetry, with most people have a revulsion to for some reason. Kids. My real life one, who I'm going to get into,
Yeah.
is Rob Reardon, who was the co-founder of High Tech High, and he
Ah,
will always be my forever lifelong mentor. I've never seen someone cry when reading a 10-year-old's work, but he couldn't get through. He could not get through any piece of writing that a 10-year-old wrote without crying, and the tears were always because of just his connection, I think,
ah.
and his understanding of where every kid was at. And this is by no means a life moving piece that he's reading. It's just the way he was.
He's really passionate about his work and really cared, it sounds like.
Mhm. For
Uh,
sure.
for fiction, for me, it's there's an author named Pat Conroy who wrote about the South, and
Mm,
he, I think he went to the Peace Corps and came back and taught on an island off of South Carolina, where the kids literally had not been off the island. They
mhm,
know how to swim, that sort of thing, because this was their life, and um, it was turned into a movie. The book he wrote a book about called "The Water Is Wide." I think that's his first book, and he writes beautifully about the South in general. And then and then it was turned into a movie with John Voight called Conrack. And I think I think what stands out to me, it's about a teacher who's making learning fun and experiential, and there's some irreverency about teaching and learning to a certain extent. So if you ever see the movie, it's great. It's one that sticks out in my memory. I also love Anne Shirley and Green of Green Gables, which I read in upper elementary grades and loved. And I think about the BBC series with Anne Shirley and how great that
mm,
was and how that came to life. And because became a teacher, and she also had teachers that inspired her in that. And then in real life, I had an English teacher who took me aside my sophomore year of high school, and my parents were going through a horrendous divorce, and she took me running with her, and it
mm,
was my friend, and just somebody to listen to. And I really needed that. And not every kid gets that. And I hope that, from the pandemic, that we're kind of becoming more aware of how we can, if you're working with students, how we can make sure every kid feels acknowledged and heard. I think that's one of the big lessons that's come out of everything recently. Okay, one last one. And if anybody else wants to tell us about a favorite teacher of theirs, please do. And there goes my phone again. Sorry, Karen, I'll call you back. Which word or words do you overuse? Our friend Don always uses the word amplify. And now he's been saying y'all all the time. And that kind of irritates me. So I don't know where he gets the y'all. It might be from, I think Succession might be people saying y'all on it. I'm not sure. So what's a word that you use most, overuse?
Yeah, might be it actually. I overuse a lot of phrases, so that's hard to pick just one. I will say my partner did point out a phrase that I like to use a lot, and I say so. And this is sometimes, when my partner is sharing a story and, they're done, it's been five minutes of sharing. And, I respond with so, and it's a complete other thought of something I've been wanting to say, perhaps. and, and so, see, I just said it again. He goes, "Oh, did you hear the story that I was just sharing?" It's like, that's not a very good transition, word to somehow relate it to something I wanted to share. So, yeah, maybe.
So I think it's time.
Yeah, so what's yours?
I think it's time to turn this over to you. Mano is saying that she uses globally competent a lot, and that's good. And suppose, yes. I also use awesome a lot, and it really irritates me because awesome makes me sound like I'm, in sixth grade or something. So, okay, so I'm going to turn it over to you. And if you want to, do you want to share your desktop, or do you want to upload your slides, or how do you want to do?
Yeah, I think I'll just share, if that's okay. I'll share some slides I had, but I wanted to, I wanted to start first. I want to acknowledge the fact that AI is on a lot of our minds. I think that we've had varying levels of responses to it. I will say that AI has been embraced, I think, by the educators who embraced technology, who embraced Google when it came out, embraced one-to-one laptops, in the same way, right? It's a no change. It can really enhance what they're doing in the classroom. I think that the fear, it's been warranted, but it's also the same fear that we had around other kind of technology. And the reason I want to start with that is because we're kind of coming to this day and age of like, what is the teacher's role? Especially when we have these algorithms that can personalize and individualize education with just literally the click of a mouse. And the good news for us, I think, as educators, is our job is not on the chopping block. There are other jobs that are. And if you care to look it up, I think it's will AI take my job in the future? And teachers, I think, one of the top professions that are safe from that. So we don't necessarily need to worry about AI taking over, but the question is, how do we how do we serve the most value? Now, the first classroom that I walked into that I would say was one of the most remarkable classrooms was a classroom that is usually tech averse. It was a Montessori classroom. And, a lot of people have been in the Montessori field or in Montessori education. And it's not to say that they're tech averse, because they're not, but they're very child centric. And I think this is where the focus needs to be. We need to be learner centric. And once we are, and once we have a pedigree for how to do that, it doesn't matter really what kind of technological innovation comes in, it will fit in to what we already do. And so this presentation is just going to be a bit around, what do learner-centric environments look like? What do they sound like? What do they feel like? I'm going to take us through a narrative of an experience that was very learner-centric, so we have a very tangible thing to latch onto, and a couple provocative questions for us to consider as we're trying to create these kind of environments in the age of very technological advancements. So I'm going to start with, and I'll present this. Hopefully, this will work. So bear with me for a second. I think, yep, here it is. Again, this presentation is entitled "Where is the teacher, the 12 shifts for learner-centered classrooms. Now, we're going to try to unpack those and cover those together. So in the chat window, get ready when there's a question. And the first question is, if you were to walk into a learner-centered classroom environment, now really think expansively, doesn't necessarily have to be a classroom, because as I mentioned, those summer camps that I was a part of, one of the most learner-centered environments I've seen. What would you see, hear, feel? What would the teacher be doing? And what would students be doing? So I want to start with that in the chat window. Don't be shy. What do you think you would see?
Oh, I love going into learner-centered classrooms, and first of all, you hear noise. First of all, it's busy. You see students taking control of their own learning in terms of what activities they're doing. We have noisy kids, a healthy buzz. What else would I hope to see? I hope to see kids helping each other.
Mm-hmm.
Alice is saying clapping and laughing. You see, I think when you see truly learner-centered rooms, you're seeing kids that are engaged. They're not. I think the big fear with all this is always that kids are going to go off and do their own thing and they're going to be goofing off or whatever. But actually, when you give them that freedom, they're so excited. And usually if the design of the learning is good, they're so wrapped up in it that they're making the most of that time. It seems. I'm thinking of like the fourth grade students I worked with my last school on different technology projects, or their pioneer project where they were making butter. They were shaking jars with buttermilk in it and making butter like the pioneers did back in olden times. And just how excited they were, and that age is particularly, I think, fun to work with because they're so excited to show their learning too.
Yeah, I like it. Some of the things I heard you say is around design, right? And that design is almost invisible, right? Because when you're walking in, you don't necessarily know what the learning experience is, but you see all kids up and about in various different positions. And you shared a little bit of that. You said the word project. I see here in the chat window, noise again. Thinking out loud, right? I had a teacher that taught next to me when I first started, and this was not a high-tech high, it was another school, and she said, "Can you keep it down over there? It's always so noisy, And this is a librarian who, she probably was great, I think, in her day and age, but she was kind of on her way out as a teacher. And I remember that struck me because you can hear a pin drop in her classroom. So I'd always apologize, but I'm not apologizing anymore. There's definitely going to be some noise, some discussions as we see here. Students interacting, I see here in the comment window as well, right? Collaboration. But I also do think that we throw out a lot of these terms, and I think it's nice to think concretely, because I talked to one person, her name was Kristen Damberger, and she's a wonderful educator. And I interviewed her on my podcast, and we were talking about teams. And I said, how do these teachers, manage teams? We always talking about it. And she says, the thing about project-based experiences is there is a structure, there is a design. It's just invisible. You can't see it. And that really kind of rang true with me, because when I, first walked into what I wanted to be a learner-centered classroom, this was after that narrative that I shared with you. I was at another school, and then I transitioned to high-tech high because they were okay with a lot of noise. And so this is my, my first classroom. And as you can see, quite this colorful, energetic, idealistic teacher. People laugh when I show this picture in workshops, because I kind of feel like I was, like a 70s kind of child, but like, even though I was born in the 80s, you can tell by my dress. A lot of color you see there, right?
You look very San Diego surfer to me.
It's totally San Diego surfer. And then everybody asks me too. They're like, "Oh, you're from San Diego? Do you surf?" And I say, "Nah, I don't. I don't surf." They're like, "Oh, do you skateboard?" "No, I don't skateboard." "What do you do?" And I'm like, "Oh, I play tennis." And it's just it doesn't really have the same appeal. So yeah, I don't surf. But,
we'll have to play tennis sometime. I'm a tennis player.
Yeah.
So is Gary Stager. So I want to have like an ISTE, like a tennis tournament as a free activity one year. one of the things that sticks out in this picture to me too, that I was thinking about this week, is the blank spaces in on the
Yeah,
cabinets there. And there was a really good, I'll look and find it. There's a really good post about leaving your walls blank when the kids come in. You don't have to have everything decorated and store bought and whatever. Have the kids take advantage of it. There's a really good in middle. There's a middle school blog that I read, and I loved this post this week, so I'll find it and put in there. But those blank spaces are also teaching spaces, right? It's
yeah.
not.
Yep. And I remember someone came in to observe, and I started filling that space because I thought that's what you do. You decorate your classroom and so forth. And I left up a brainstorm from a while back because I was kind of proud of it. And I was like, oh, the kids, I led this, this facilitated this discussion. He's like, yeah, that's been up there for, about a month. And I'm like, oh, yeah, what do you think? He's like, well, I mean, it seems like it was probably relevant at some time, but it's, what if that space could be that interactive space that, students are all up on? So yeah, I completely agree. And it took me a while to realize that, because at first, and I'm glad you mentioned that. At first, this is what I thought project-based learning was going to be. I thought, hey, I turn it over to my kids. The kids are high-fiving me at the end of every day because I've just created this kind of environment that allows them to flourish. And so this is what I envisioned, and really, this is what the reality was. It was not high fives every day as I came out of the classroom. It was more of like, how do you truly do this? If you have 20 to 25 learners, some of us have more. How do we really set up an environment that's going to allow all of them to flourish? Because the reality is, we do have standards, we do have curriculum, we have a subject to teach, right? Um, and we have some of us have a training and a background that allows us to set up these kind of classrooms, but quite frankly, a lot of the training that we're engaged with doesn't necessarily teach us how to be adaptive, how to be flexible, right? And we've talked a lot about this kind of new mindset and agile thinking. And I went to Rob Reardon, and I told you he was my mentor. And he was a co-founder of High Tech High. And I said, look, I'm struggling because I want kids to be high-fiving their way out of the classroom every day, but that's not necessarily the case. It's not necessarily what's happening. And he handed me this paper, and I'll never forget. It's a Word document, very, very simple. You didn't need any fancy tools, by the way, to create this. And it was simply a document that showed 12 dispositions on the left and 12 dispositions on the right, and there was just arrows. Some arrows were going both ways. Some arrows were just going one way. And it was like, here is what we kind of want to see happening in your classroom, if it's really centered around the kids. And that one-page document has stayed with me for a very, very long time. And it was around these kind of 12 shifts. And because I thought initially, and I'm not saying project-based experiences, there's so many ways to create learner-centered environments, right? It's not just around project-based experiences. These shifts can apply to any kind of experience. It could be personalized experience that students are going to, projects that they take up. You could use the design thinking framework, right? There's a lot of stuff that we talk about in education, but really, if we get down to it, if we're trying to create learner-centered environments, what does that look like? And I show this picture because this was one of my first exhibitions of work with students at High Tech High. And again, I was a new teacher. I was still gung-ho and excited. But as you might notice in the background, what they're displaying is all the same thing. It was all a shoebox museum. And some of the kids really took to it, but a lot of kids didn't. They saw this as another kind of cookie cutter project where it was just, a kind of paint by numbers. And I realized through these shifts that it's not just about doing something that's paint by numbers. Once I internalized the shifts, it was about kids creating all different types of products, kids answering a big kind of meaningful question, engaging in real work in the outside of the classroom. And this is an experience I led over at the International School of Beijing. As I mentioned, my love affair that started with this part of the world. And students we're taking on a big, meaningful question around water quality and how they can make an improvement on it. This is a very sensitive topic, as you probably could be aware, especially in a country that was trying to be tight-lipped about some of its some of its challenges. And kids were taking this on, and kids developed products that ranged from this girl over here. She created toxic-free cosmetics using eco-friendly products. That's was something she was into. This girl here collected all these old clothes, upcycled them, and pitched that to the local supermarket, and they actually accepted that. And the students were doing real work as scientists, as environmental engineers, and that a lot of that I would say could be attributed to those 12 shifts. Now, if you're walking a teacher-centered classroom, I did ask, what does a learner-centered environment look like? Lucy, what would you say if you walk into a teacher-centered classroom? What do you think you would see?
The teacher's desk in the front or the front corner. Uh, uh, a blackboard or whiteboard or some sort of projection device that's focused on the front with the kids all in desks and rows.
Yeah.
Or maybe the teacher's desk is in the back so they can keep an eye on all the kids from behind, and because they don't trust them. But you probably wouldn't see kids in small groups. You might, depending on what the furniture is that's available and the teacher's philosophy. And I think this is a big part of a teacher's philosophy. Like, you have to sometimes I've written, philosophy statements for work for different schools before for jobs. And I think this is, the design of the environment is just as important as everything else. The physical space really, really impacts everything as well. So it would be interesting, if I redid my little philosophy statement to talk a little bit about the spaces too.
Yeah, I think that's wonderful what you mentioned, and that's such an easy fix for teachers. It causes anxiety for some of us,
Yeah.
And I would say before going to the next educational conference on the next latest innovation or AI, design tech, right? These are all great. SDGs, all wonderful, right? But if you have not repositioned your classroom to be groups potentially, maybe you remove the tables. I remember some teachers, they got rid of the tables and they just had like little shelves. I mean, go think about a co-working space. You kind of go in there, and the assumption is that people want to work, and they want to work in a way that is conducive for them. So you mentioned that about rows. That's the first thing I'll tell people do. And I love showing this picture. Okay, the reason I love showing this picture, and sorry, I found it on Google, but I thought it was great because sometimes we think, oh, Blackboard, and we think old school, right? Well, I mean, this guy's got some pretty new technology. He's got a smart board up in the front. I don't know if this kid over here is plugging his ears. I apologize if this might have been a great lesson, right? He looks like he might have been teaching them some kind of video game design, but he's at the center. Here's his desk up front, right? He's got his computer open. The kids are kind of all just waiting, listening to him, waiting probably to get out of their seats and actually do something quite active. And so I transitioned from that to this, and I mentioned that Montessori classroom, and this is actually a Montessori classroom, but not the traditional Montessori classroom you would see in terms of the way that they've set up the environment, because a lot of it is with the core curriculum. This was taking, and I was working with a Montessori school, and this was taking an approach to what would the design tech space look like. Do you see, Lucy, where the teacher is, if you could spot that teacher?
Yeah, on the left, it looks like she might be even talking to somebody that's off frame, maybe.
Exactly. And you guys we talked about what are you going to see, right? So what do you see here that is indication that this might be more learner centric?
What does the audience think? I'd love to hear from everybody else. Well, first of all, there's no desks. You see kids standing in small
Mm-hmm.
groups. You see real materials,
Mm-hmm.
like cardboard and paper. It looks like some sort of kind of poster paper, and there is technology around, but some kids are using it, some are not.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's also the lighting and the windows add to kind of like the open feel of the room too, it seems like.
Hmm.
There's stools, not chairs. What else? What
Hmm.
else? What other people see in here besides? I'm sure people are seeing
Yeah.
things
What
more.
other people see?
Yeah, uh,
They see they like to be there.
kids are focusing on
Yeah.
their work. Ekaterina is saying that she'd like to be there. It's a place that she wants to be. So, like,
Yeah.
if we think of desks in a row and thinking, oh, like we wouldn't want that for ourselves, why would our students want that? You know,
Yeah.
and and
100%.
and given what constraints one has in their school, how can you make your room appealing? And that's
Hmm.
a huge thing in terms of engaging learners, I think.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And we have these maker spaces, right? And we were like, okay, we believe this is important. Let's put a maker space up in the school. And then we look at our classrooms, and I even hear this with learning. They're like, okay, guys, exam week is over. Now it's time to have some fun for a week, and we're going to do a project. And the same thing comes to our environments. We go, all right, the maker space is over there. Hope you enjoyed your time. Now let's take out our books, and everyone sits in rows. And it's like we need to have that same maker kind of mentality when it comes to our classrooms, because it can easily be transferred, and it's just really doing a couple different things. And what you notice here is, yeah, most kids decided to stand up. I'm working right now. I'm standing up. Once I got a standing desk, I'll tell you, my productivity increased threefold for sure. You know, um, we like to choose the way in which we work as adults. We should give kids that opportunity as well. Now, what I mentioned to you at the beginning when you said the word design, there is an invisible design that's going on here that is engaging kids. There's a meaningful question. There's something they're engaged with to try to answer that question, and they're developing real products. This is a particular project where they're designing habitat for all the pets in the different classrooms of their younger peers. So that, of course, engaged kids around that. Now, that's not the main one that I'm going to unpack. Um, I apologize for my voice. I literally had a show last night, um, and it's very early in the morning. It's 5 in the morning, and I had a show that went till midnight. It was Battle of the Bands, so my voice is really shot.
It sounds like
Okay.
you're fine. Don't worry. I'm also thinking the other thing that's also popping in my mind, and I'm going to put the article in the chat in a second, is I was reading a blog post by Larry Cuban, who is a professor emeritus at Stanford, um, about the kind of the overpromise of technology and the under delivery of it, and
Mm,
and and he basically said we hoped that it was going to be this great game changer in education, that technology would change the teaching and learning and make it more innovative or whatever, but really it's been used to kind of facilitate learning um, in traditional ways. And so I
mm,
think I love ed tech. I love technology. Don't get me wrong. That's been my bread and butter. But it ultimately it's not about the tech. It's about what you do with the tech. And I want to see kids publish and create and make things with that technology. And here, this is a nice blend of things. It's human interaction. There's technology there if they need it as a tool, right? But
right.
there's so many other things going on, and the technology shouldn't get in the way of that. So
Yeah, I,
yeah.
I love that kind of idea. Um, and I think we've all thought that these things are going to be silver linings and they're going to solve our education problems. And Maria Montessori, 100 years ago was talking about this kind of education. And people would have labeled her as quite progressive at that time. I think we need to return to that concept. I have a presentation I do on high tech high, and I say low tech high because, quite frankly, it was very low tech. I was there. I was always into the tech teacher be like, this laptop's not working. We don't have enough of this. And once I got away from that, you realize that tech can enhance, of course, but right, you see some students, they're using tech to enhance. Some are using it for design. Some are using it for research. You see some computers are open here because I think these students started designing. By the way, I exposed them to Google SketchUp. Those are 9-year-olds. Literally that session, I said, okay, here's how to use it. Like, okay, can we just start? I'm like, oh, okay, go ahead. And yeah, they learned it within a couple minutes, and they like were moving on. So I think we need to be really to embrace it. And if you don't have a clear pedigree for teaching and learning, I will always say this: then nothing is going to save us as teachers. We need to really have a pedigree for how teaching and learning looks. I think project-based learning is a great structure. I am a huge evangelist for it, having been, at a project-based school. However, my co-founder of High Tech High that I mentioned to you said, we're not a project-based school. I said, what does that mean? Kids are engaged in projects all the time. He said, we're a dialogue school. I said, okay, that's interesting. And so I really like that, because the whole idea is that learning is constantly being negotiated. And some people think of project-based experience as being totally packaged up and given to kids and say, here you go. But really, it's around a big question, a meaningful pursuit, and then constantly negotiating learning. And let me skip this one. So here's the ones I expose you to. And I like to put this up first. This was what was worked out with, again, as I mentioned, the co-founder of High Tech High. He had done some work on it. We collaborated a little bit later in the future. And I've also too curated this with a large group of practitioners and asked them what they think are some of the keys for these kind of experiences and environments. And this is what we had come up with. And I'll put it in here. I'll put it in the chat window, because I'm going to give this at the end as well. But there's a brief scorecard that you can take as well, just to see where you are at kind of on this spectrum. And I think it's important for us to unpack a little bit these, and I'm going to unpack these in a learning experience. So I'll try to do this pretty quickly. But how do we move from teacher-centered environments to learner-centered environments? I apologize, don't pay attention to those dates at all. This was, I changed up the presentation a little bit, but you can see as I've given this presentation before. So I want you to picture this, okay? You're trying to think in your mind, okay, great, Kyle, I've seen that. I've seen your visual. I do believe in that. I believe in giving kids ownership, but what does that look like? And so I'm going to take you through an experience and show how these shifts kind of come into play. Now, picture this, the all school alarm goes off, fire alarm. And, kids don't know what's going on. Teachers don't know what's going on. And they're brought out by buses to this field. The kids are asking all the way, what is going on? What is happening? I don't know. Let's remain calm. We take them out to the middle of this field, and you see set up here are these different booths, these different stations. This is the intake. Students are given a food ration. They're have their temperature take, their health check, and then they're asked to wait over in an area. And as any kids will do, they're kind of kicking their feet around. These are middle schoolers, wondering what's going on. Some people start to get a little bit restless, but we try to keep things as orderly as possible. Imagine then that we bring everyone back to school after this experience, and we say, what has happened is our particular society has experienced, unfortunately, a terrible catastrophe, and we have to piece it together, repiece it together. Now, the kids first think about, well, what do we kind of need to do that? Well, we're probably going to need to produce food. They did talk about what are the things that they really need, and one of the first things kids said is we need cell phones for our new society, and we tried to get them down to like, do you need cell phones as much as other things? And finally they're like, okay, yeah, we need food. And I'm like, what do you guys know about food and growing food? Oh, not much. As you can tell here, they don't really know much. So they're meeting here with a farmer who we had brought in from the community. He was a local, and he was doing a lot of his own farming outside of the school, and we partnered with him. We let him know what was going on ahead of time. And we said to the kids, okay, well, we've got to start doing that, quickly. And right away, students are engaged in this inquiry, because the inquiry is centered around a meaningful experience, this meaningful kind of launch. Inquiry can be centered around anything. Sometimes it's from, just what you see students are into. Sometimes it's kind of teacher facilitated. And, when we talk about this first particular shift, students were having to come together themselves. They were having to come together as committees and decide, well, okay, how are we going to govern ourselves? What kind of, food are we going to grow? Um, they're having to meet with experts in the community on food growth, and ask them. Um, so they start to engage in this experience, and they decide, okay, one of the first things we're going to do is we got this field outside, and we say, okay, well, how are you going to divide that up? And immediately, we're turning over this kind of learning to students, right? So it starts with this big kind of inquiry. There's this gap in what students are going to need to know. And the idea is we are, just like Montessori said, when the child is ready, we are trying, filling that gap. And so, these are those first couple shifts. We expose them to this big question: as a new society, how will we feed and govern ourselves sustainably? Um, Now, when you're thinking about planning these kind of experiences, another thing we have to think about for learner-centric environments is how much are we collaborating, with others, to put these things together. I see you nodding your head, because there was no way as a humanities teacher I could engage kids in experiences like this quite authentically with just my humanities knowledge. So what do you think about that, Lucy, in terms of collaborating with other teachers?
Well, I think of schedules. I think about how
Yeah.
difficult it is. The schools that do this well, they figured out that time for collaboration. And typically in US schools, my understanding is that there's less time for collaborating there than there is in schools abroad. Um, and so I think that's part of it. I think it's also um, I think making things transdiscipline is the hardest. I just
Yeah.
asked the audience. I think, but if you come together and have regular conversations about it and have some sort of structure, then I would think the ideas would flow when you're with the art teacher and you're with the science teacher, and you can all piggyback on each other's ideas. But if you don't allocate that time, I don't know how that's ever going to happen magically.
Yeah. And what I tell people is go with what is the lowest hanging fruit, right? The person that who teaches next door to you, perhaps, right? And maybe you share the same set of kids. Sometimes these conversations happen in the staff room. Sometimes they happen over coffee. I talked to a group that said they planned out a whole experience, and it was on a napkin, at a cafe that they met at during one of their breaks. So yes, this is challenging for a lot of us. And we say, hey, I got this curriculum to go through. I don't have this planning time. Guess what? Sometimes we have to make time for that because it's going to just enhance the experience. You mentioned that some schools globally have more of this opportunity. I've been at tons of schools that don't. They still are very much department centered. So this is very, very hard. But one of the greatest quotes, again, comes from Rob Root. I'm getting a lot of quotes from him. He said, "Stop seeing your subject as a body of content and start seeing it as a lens to see the world." And that really stuck with me because all of these teachers are coming from their lens of their subject to really enhance this experience. And you're going to see that, coming together and kind of thinking about, okay, for this particular big experience, how are the subjects fitting in? And I think, it's quite obvious as well. If you're a teacher here and you're tuning in, you might see it from your lens. And, I tell people when it comes to this kind of transdisciplinary structure, don't pack it, right? Don't start overpacking this thing with 10 different subjects, all these things kids could do. Really try to get down to the simple structure, because the simple structures, Larry Rosenstock of High Tech High, quote I remember from him, is simple structures will beget complex outcomes. So have your simple structure for the learning experience, then start getting the complexity of your curriculum. So, we predicted what kind of questions are they going to need to answer? How are we going to support them in this? They generated all these questions. They started thinking how they're going to grow. Lucy, you mentioned as well, students leading the discussions. Well, we put students right at the beginning. We said, okay, guys, have at it. You've got a few days for planting season with that field out there. How do you want to divide it up? And students, these two students immediately, because they were very kind of leader oriented, they stepped up. They started arguing very not viciously, right? They weren't throwing things at each other, but they were clearly shouting at each other. People started to tune out, and finally, they realized this idea of governance is not easy, but they're realizing that through just this conversation. And that's one of the things we wanted to expose them to. one of the things they need to know is how to make decisions in their society. So you can kind of be predictive when you're designing these kind of learning experiences. Again, students are gathering information throughout the whole experience. Now, some people ask, hey, can I do direct instruction when it comes to this? Of course you can, right? Sometimes it involves a 10, 15-minute, talk with the kids. And sometimes, you're allowing that to happen because, as I mentioned, whereas the teacher is acting as a facilitator. So these are students involved in discussions. When you're scaffolding inquiry throughout the experience, we're trying to move from teacher guided to learner directed. I will tell people that at first, when you engage students, find out what they know, because they might know a lot more than you think. You're probably going to need to guide them a lot at the beginning, but then you start to support them a little bit more. And then eventually, it's going to be learner centered, learner directed. Anything that you want to mention on that, Lucy?
How do you Ekaterina is talking about how it's the learners aren't the issue. Sometimes it's the adults, and my friend Don, who usually comes into these things, has also found that this year he's really into working with kids because he gives them a couple ideas and they run with it, right? So how do you get the adults to let go of that teacher guided approach and let the learners lead?
So that's a great question. I will say, I'll show you one adult here, a great friend is at this program. He was a science counterpart. His name's Brendan Riley. And, part of the thing, and he's been comfortable with this from the beginning. However, when it came to somebody's experience, his biggest discomfort was like science. What science are they going to learn through this, right? And a lot of teachers just want to ensure if we assume positive intentions, that the teacher doesn't necessarily not want to give learners control, they're just afraid that they're not going to learn the core kind of skills or content that they're going to need. I think you have to honor that. And once you honor that and you chat with that teacher, that, hey, how would you see your subject fitting into this? What would you want to see kids be able to demonstrate for you to feel comfortable? And they still had their lesson time. He was teaching kids, this whole idea of aquaponics, hydroponics, they're kind of building models together. There were these smaller times. It wasn't just setting learners off that you see here. So I think you still have those times where you still have the kind of self-contained small group of kids. You don't collapse everything all at once. And you could have this co-designed experience and having kids in different classrooms doing that kind of work in the same way that you would teach previously. Hopefully not, right? You're not lecturing, but you're still kind of at least guiding them to answer a bigger question. I don't know if that answers, hopefully. Um, so, you're scaffolding inquiry throughout the process. And as I mentioned, you are not going to be comfortable just setting the kids loose, right? We set them loose at first, and they realize there's a gap in knowledge. We're helping them to acquire that. And that's where you're really mapping this thing out. And you are saying, here's the kind of lessons that they're going to experience. Here's the kind of activities they're engaged with. So you still do that planning. So, thinking about how to foster inquiry in a classroom and making it more transdisciplinary. Now, student work and reflection. So what then happens now to student work as a result? And Lucy, one of the things you mentioned is, we want to see students using technology, right, to create things that are meaningful products, that are, authentic representations of themselves. And how do you kind of engage students in that? And I know in terms of time, and usually if I'm doing this longer, I would take this, but think about the most memorable piece of work that you created in school. One of the most memorable pieces of work I created was this, it was this science experiment I underwent all about polymers, trying to help with plant growth. So, and that was from a long time ago. But if we think about these memorable experiences, we're probably producing work that had some kind of audience that was purposeful. And so this is what I say for these shifts. Start thinking about, what are students going to produce in your learning experience? Who are they going to share that with? You mentioned the churning of the butter, Lucy. Who did they exhibit that at the end? Who did they share that with?
I think they ate it. They smeared it on crackers and ate it. They each had their own individual portion. This is during the pandemic, I believe.
Okay. So they ate it. Just they literally ate the butter without anything else on it.
They
They
had,
just put.
they had crackers, yeah, and
Okay, crackers.
yeah.
All right.
But the one I was just thinking about, the most memorable thing my son brought home, and somebody had mentioned earlier, Amelia Reggio. My kids went to a Reggio, and we can go over a little bit if you want to too. So don't worry about the time. The Reggio
Okay.
went to a Reggio nursery school, and the they didn't bring home a ton of stuff, and then that was fine. Like at the end of the school year, it was a couple of memorable projects, and one of them was these little kindergarten or nursery school kids. We were on the University of Chicago campus, and there was a pond, a couple blocks away called Botany Pond, and they wanted to show their assistant teacher how to get to Botany Pond because they didn't know how to get there. So they went and took pictures of different landmarks, and they drew pictures of landmarks like the mailbox on the way, and whatever. And then they made and then they made a topographical map kind of with paper mache and that sort of thing. They did all these activities around getting Mr. David to Botany Pond, and then the teacher took all the pictures and and narratives, things that they had dictated, and put it into a book for us at the end of the year. I still have it somewhere, and it's my
Wow.
favorite thing. So you don't have to do like big grandiose things all the time. A big part of Reggio, from my understanding, is that you document that learning,
Yeah.
and so that could be the end product that you're achieving. But anyway, I was just thinking about that when you were mentioning it, so sorry, I
Yeah,
detracted.
no, and I love that, and it's documented somehow, right? You keep it. Ron Berger, who probably a lot of people know from Ethics of Excellence, he brings around a case of projects, a case of student work wherever he goes, because you want to think, what are you going to keep? Because a lot of projects are going to go in the dumpster out back. Let's be honest. I remember my projects back when I built these castles. All it went in the same place all the other kids' castles went into. It went in the dumpster out back because we only spent like a day or two on it, right? Try to think of what is going to be a longer term experience. And I think that's a great illustration you gave, Lucy, Botany Pond. And you can come at that from so many angles, from a map of how to get there to like, well, what actually goes on there and what's the significance of Botany Pond to the community. It's limitless in terms of what students might be able to produce. So when it comes to work, think of it in terms of that. Like, what are kids going to produce that is going to be memorable? So students, of course, were answering that question, as you recall from the beginning. As a new society, how do we feed and govern ourselves sustainably? They're coming up with their various ideas now of how to grow food. Of course, it involves an explanation of aquaponics and hydroponics and vertical gardens and urban gardens and this whole idea of sustainability. They're working with this local um, uh, food grower, and she had completely done aquaponics hydroponics system, and was trying to be self-sustaining. And we're also looking not just at the science behind it, but we're really also looking about the larger issue of food production, right? So in language, we were looking at a book, and I'll share that in a second. But kids are doing hands-on work. They're presenting their ideas to professionals. We brought in environmental engineer. Um, some of these are teachers at the school to evaluate their proposals or their presentations. They're sharing ideas for how they're going to govern themselves. So we're getting into all the different types of government. These are kids, by the way, giving presentations to their peers, and we're just facilitating the conversation. The whole time, you don't really see the teacher. So think about, what are you going to ask students to produce that is going to be memorable, and how are you going to get students there? This is oftentimes, we will do a reflection at the end, right? We'll go through all of this whole process, and then at the end we'll go, okay, now it is time to reflect on the learning experience. But I think, as you mentioned, Lucy, too, in documenting that whole map, the whole experience, the way students were creating for that teacher how to get there, they're constantly having to reflect along the way. They're constantly having to, whether it's the teacher, whether it's themselves, taking pictures, because if they're going to produce something that's professional, right, or they're going to produce a map that teacher is going to use, they want to make sure they get it right so it's actually useful. Same case here. If they're producing work on how they're going to propose future food production, they want to have multiple attempts to be able to get there. And, reflection is happening ongoing throughout the experience. So my question with us is, how do we prompt that level of continual reflection in our students? And here's some of the ways we did that. So how might you foster deeper reflection with students on their learning? There could definitely be over reflection, which you're constantly asking them to think about what they're doing in every step of the way. Like, let them do a little first, but then, help them reflect. Any thoughts on that, Lucy?
I was just thinking in my last school with some service learning projects that students did, middle schoolers, we used Flipgrid for reflections,
Hmm.
and then the parents, they had kind of a an open house type of activity where the parents came in and saw things, and they could click on the Flipgrid and listen to different students view thoughts on it and that sort of thing. So setting up some kind of prompts in a Flipgrid is one way to do it, where it's not necessarily writing. um, I mean, there's so many ways you could do it, and it doesn't have to be something that's super long. It could be an exit ticket, couldn't it? I mean, like
Yep.
it doesn't have to be being overcomplicated with things, I would think.
Yep. Completely. Yeah, Flipgrid's wonderful, right? Just whatever kind of tools you're already using, continue to use that. I see some teachers, they just use Google Slide Deck, so easy. And that just becomes this interactive space for students. And teachers can comment back and forth. They have a couple guiding questions as they're going through the experience. And you're really seeing how the student grows. So yeah, think simple, but just think how do you make this ongoing? And we're trying to build this collaborative culture. So the shift number 8. Notice how I'm using the word "so" a lot. I just thought about it. I said so. No, I asked Rob. I had the arrow going over here. I said, okay, it's going to collaborative. He's like, no. He's like, Kyle, you need to have the arrow going both ways, because students are going to be completing work collaboratively, and they're also going to be completing work independently, because they of course have a team that they're working with, right? And they need to produce work for them and share something as a group. But every kid's going to have their special way in which to contribute. And the same thing, I could take us back to that initial picture. Every student has their individual interests and their strengths. Now, we want to engage students, of course, in taking on all different types of team roles, because that's what's going to happen in the future. They need to be able to do that. But we do want to help them play to their strengths, which is kind of what you see here. Some students are going to be very hands-on. Some students are going to be very kind of visual, and they might be drawing or ideating the different kind of design. You see students here working together. Some students are going to be those ones who are very great at public speaking. And, we want to allow for that in the learning experience. And again, you might be thinking this and saying, wow, I have to do all this. But again, keep it simple. What kind of question or experience can you engage students in that's really meaningful? And then all of these things will come out of it if you, really plan accordingly. So they're coming up with, they're sharing what kind of model they're going to have for their society and getting feedback on it. And again, collaboration is the name of the game. And sometimes we set up collaborative structures for short activities, but I challenge us to think more than just the spaghetti tower, because let's face it, the spaghetti tower is a fun activity, right? But I can't tell you how many times I've gone to a school and they're collaborating. Look, they're doing the spaghetti tower challenge, or they're doing the egg drop. And it's something that's like, I don't know. What do you think, Lucy? Like, you see it as like a one-off thing.
I think we could be more creative than that. And I think that, to your point here too, these kids, they look to me like they've had some experience collaborating before.
Mm-hmm.
Just from your pictures, the sense I get. And you start young with this, right? Like it's about the culture that you cultivate in terms of this sort of thing. Kids don't necessarily know how to do this right off the bat, and if you're growing collaborators.
Great. I love that you're mentioning that. You're growing collaborators, right? So that's what I would say. And I just worked with someone who kind of scoped and sequenced out their year. And what they did is they said, okay, here's my first unit, my project, here's my second, here's my third, because they're trying to build. They noticed when they first said, okay, kids, go self-manage, go and prioritize your task. Um, you know, they didn't have those kind of skills built yet. And once they looked at, okay, we're going to slowly kind of build these skills in these different experiences. Um, of course, kids are going to surprise us, but it's nice to have a bit of a roadmap. So maybe do that and say, okay, how am I going to build my collaborative skills in the kind of units or experience I've set up? Um, so by the end, once you say, okay, guys, collaborate, like teamwork, they know, okay, we need to form norms. We need to have a task list. We need to understand what each other's strengths are. So I really appreciate that insight, Lucy. So how will you foster collaboration and teamwork within your classroom? Almost done with the shifts. What I mentioned as well from Rob is we're not a project-based school, we're a dialogue school. And one of the best ways to conduct these dialogues is in Socratic seminars. And that was probably my biggest takeaway when I was at iTech High and I walked into a learner-centered classroom. It was a lot of Socratic seminars. If you've never done Socratic seminars, you can research it, you can look it up. There's an inner group and they're chatting, while the outer group is observing that inner group. We had an article, we had different videos, we had students generating questions in response to that and holding the conversation themselves. Omnivore's Dilemma is a great book if you ever want to engage in this kind of experience. And that was kind of our core text piece. What about Socratic seminars did you want to mention, Lucy?
I did them a long time ago. Oh my gosh. We had some sort of training through the Padea Institute here in Chicago. And
Beautiful.
that was when I was teaching second and third grade, like a long time ago, before I had kids. So 25 years ago, maybe. But I also think of like
Definitely.
Harkness tables that are big in some high schools. I think Andover, Exeter has pioneered that work. Um, but anyway, I don't have anything pithy to say other than that.
Yeah. So some people have dabbled in it. It's not the only way, but I will say protocols and structures are quite nice because they are going to inspire thinking patterns, right? We can't just say to kids, okay, here's a book, here's an article, let's chat about it. This is nice to have some kind of structure. So, kids prepare questions looking at this particular article, looking at books, right? And you could pick these anchor texts or these articles, or sometimes kids can bring those as well. And they're engaged in real, meaningful, critical thinking discussions. What is the best way to grow food? Because in this book, it shares 4 different ways, and it shares pros and cons from all different angles. So really, when you have some good text and you have a format to help them have discussions, they're going to really, get deep level of conversation. So finally, we're going to finish up with evaluating, exhibiting, learning. So I shared a lot of stuff around inquiry, how you stimulate that discussion, what kind of student work students might be creating, and how you can kind of stimulate that. Now, when it comes to evaluating, exhibiting, learning, if you recall, we had those teachers together at the beginning. And sometimes you do this with kids. You go, okay, how are we going, to exhibit this? How are we going to share this learning? And then sometimes you set up, a real kind of experience for them. And, they're having these kind of forums all over the world, right, around these big issues of food production, climate change, and so forth. So, it was set up in a bit of a forum. And, how then do you get them to that forum? How do you assess them along the way to ensure that they're ready when it comes to that final product? I know we're running a lower time, so I won't stress too much in this. I will just say that it's great to be explicit and work with students to really define, as they're producing their various products and work. What are we really looking for? What's our target? So all those rubrics that we've created are now, really working towards a common outcome. Students are constantly getting feedback on what they're producing through these gallery walks. They're sharing with their peers, they're sharing with experts, and their audience for work is a meaningful audience that I mentioned. These are the people who are the hydroponics, aquaponics people we brought in, and students were sharing their ideas and getting feedback on those, and also sharing with their peers. And as you notice, the teacher isn't necessarily here in the picture. The teacher, again, is just facilitating the sharing of those things. And that forum that I mentioned to you, they had that forum where they're sharing their solutions, and um, then they had their big feast. It wasn't the butter. Um, at the end, they now I wish I could say that all the dumplings and everything was completely grown. All the crops for that was grown by them in the garden. That's not necessarily the case. They did grow some lettuce, some bok choy, and had some herbs and so forth. But the most important thing is, at the end, we're celebrating and having this feast, and we're going back to that big question: how to feed themselves sustainably in the future. And that kind of wraps up my presentation. Just to share some pictures of the kind of uh, fields that they grew at the end. And if you are for this 12 shifts, if you're interested in taking a scorecard, just to identify for yourself, hey, where particularly can I improve, and what can I do in my classroom to make those shifts. There is a scorecard here. I did put it in the chat window, Lucy. It's the transformschool.com 12 shifts. I'll put it again. You can scan that if you want that code. But here's the link that should work. I don't know if it comes up as a link. And then I'll just, ask you some questions, take the scorecard, be able to identify, don't think about the number so much of what you score, but there will be some helpful resources once you take that to help support you in wherever you need it. And here's some teachers at one school who went through the whole kind of 12 shifts program to improve their experiences. And this is how excited they were at the end.
They look very excited. So here's all your contact information so people can get in touch with you. But there are two things I wanted to point out to everyone. One is Kyle on LinkedIn writes incredible posts. You have all these lengthy, they're not articles, they're just kind of wonderings about things and tagging people and getting people engaged. And so connect with Kyle, or at least follow him so that you can see some of the great posts that he writes about teaching and learning. The other piece is you mentioned that you're hosting some cohorts of people. I don't know how that fits into your work, if this is something that people pay for. Is it project-based kind of professional learning community? Can you tell us a little bit more about that? Because I thought it was awesome when you mentioned it
Thanks.
a while ago.
Yeah, thanks so much. Yeah, we chatted a while back, and I will first say thank you so much, Lucy, for bringing this network, this organization together, the way that you facilitate conversations. When I first met you, you were hosting, I think it was on some old software too, like this huge global network, and you just made it work. And then we talked about, hey, you're like, oh, I'm thinking about having these conversations. Oh, I'm also thinking about having this conference. And me thinking on putting on just a one-day event like gives me anxiety. And you're like, yeah, we're gonna have this conference, and then now we're gonna have this conference. So I want to say thank you for that. And
thank you.
For putting the spotlight on others. But for people who have watched this, I will say this is not work that's going to happen overnight, right? I thought it was, even being a project-based school, but it takes continual development, right? And it's not just something you go to a conference or workshop. I've realized in my work that we need to have cohort type of based learning so that you're continually getting fed, and a lot of it you're getting fed by the people in the cohort. You're not getting fed by me, because I don't want to be the one sharing, because people have so much rich experience. So there's two ways. The first way is if you're interested in the 12 shifts and you really want to focus on that in your classroom kind of teacher, there is cohorts that I lead through those different shifts. They identify which ones they want to work on, and we meet as a cohort to strengthen each other and look at each shift and how you can develop. And a lot of that is virtual work. The other one is through this larger project-based learning cohort that I'm trying to gather with practitioners all across the world, mainly in leadership positions, because they're trying to advance this type of work at their school. And so we meet around a different question every single month. Some is, hey, how do I get buy-in? What about this whole idea of transdisciplinary learning? What kind of structures can I put in place for that? assessment and how do we report on this way of learning, because it does look different. You can't just give it A, B, C, D grades. So we really kind of dive deep into that. So two ways. One is kind of like if you're a classroom practitioner in the 12 shifts, and one's more kind of leadership focused.
I think that's like a really great structure, and having it be inquiry driven and about the participants, and you're just guiding and offering, you're facilitating, and I just, it sounds great. And so um I hope that other people who are listening or who watch this later on will take you up on your offer and take a look at transformschool.com and find information about your those cohorts. That would be great.
Yeah, and just I would say just email me. Shoot me an email. Probably the best way. Some people like fumble around and like, where is that? Just email me. Tell me what you're interested in and your background, and we'll be able to set you up with a program that's going to work for you.
Okay, sounds good. Let me wrap us up really quickly. Thank you, Kyle. This has been awesome. I love this conversation, and I love the idea of showing us pictures and having prompts and having conversation around it. So this has been really creative and great. So thank you for your time. I appreciate it. Join us for our next conversation. That's Kyle. That was from last time. Here's our information if you need to connect with us with Actionable Innovations. Our next conversation is May 26th. We're going to be doing a preview for the ISTE conference and how you can, if you're coming to ISTE, you can connect with your global professional learning community at the conference. They're also, we're going to have Dr. Kayla Holland back, who has also done one of these conversations before. She and another colleague are putting together the Global Learning Playground at ISTE, and there are going to be some asynchronous virtual opportunities to participate in that, and they'll talk about that as well. So that is May 26th. And then on June 9th, we are, I'm really excited. Somebody from my kids' school is coming. Both my kids have gone to a college called Landmark College in Vermont that specializes in neurodiverse learners. And the head of research is coming to share some of their work and what Landmark College does and that sort of thing. And my daughter's going to join him. So that will be fun on June 9th. And then we have a really interesting school in Brooklyn. Don just got the founder of this school to sign up for Actionable Innovations, and I'm blanking on the name of it. I think it's called the Workshop School, and it sounds really interesting. It's an independent school, and so that we don't have the information published yet on that one, but it will be coming out soon. So if you're on our mailing list, you'll see it. But I'm really excited because we have a couple other ones that are kind of in the hopper as well. So I'm excited. We're going to continue throughout the summer having these conversations periodically, and we'd love to have you all participate. And if you want to be on one of these things, just let us know. So without further ado, I'm going to end the broadcast, everyone. But thank you so much, Kyle, for your time at this ungodly hour. You can go back to bed now.
No, I'm up. The day has started for me.
All right. The early bird gets the worm. Thanks, everyone, for coming.
Yeah, thank you.